This podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Bogosity. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. That's audibletrial.com/Bogosity. Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 15th of August 2016, the podcast that steps on the crack. This is your host, Shane Killian. First, a quick announcement. Next Saturday is our second filming day for The Woods Talk, so no podcast for 2 weeks. But again, I'll do my best to avoid canceling the podcast for 2 weeks in a row. Let's unappetize the news of the Bogus. So we've been covering Telegram and Signal and WhatsApp and how governments do not like the fact that they can hide phone calls and text messages from prying eyes, mostly theirs. Here's a story about how Telegram was hacked, possibly by the Iranian government, but this story really proves two things. One, security is hard, and two, you really can't trust the news media. So it turns out there's a vulnerability with Telegram, but this apparently doesn't exist with WhatsApp and Signal even though they use the same encryption protocol. It really has to do with what cryptographer Adi Shamir said years ago. Cryptography is typically bypassed, not penetrated. This isn't any issue with the crypto, but how the rest of the software let the hackers get around it. Now, the news stories will tell you that 15 million accounts were compromised, but as the darknet.org story I'm linking to you says, that isn't technically true. This was a two-part attack, and the first part had to do with the SMS messages that Telegram sends to a device when it's first being set up. If a hacker can obtain access to the code in this message, they can add themselves to the person's account and get access to their chat histories. That's serious, and since the Iranian government can snoop on the text messages of all Iranians, it means that they can theoretically intercept all of these texts and gain access to people's chat history. A similar vulnerability may exist with WhatsApp, that isn't known yet, but it looks like Signal did it right and isn't vulnerable to this. And by the way, this is also why NIST recently said that everyone should be using more secure options than SMS for second-factor authentication. But that's just the first part of the attack. In order for the whole attack to work, the hackers have to brute force the Telegram API with Iranian phone numbers to find the users to begin with. That's where the 15 million users come from, but the total number of users they were able to successfully hijack was 12. Not 12 million, not even 12,000, but 12. For the rest, they were able to verify that they are in fact Telegram users, but that's about it. So although this is worrying and absolutely needs to be fixed, it's a lot more difficult to do than the news media are making it out to be. So with that in mind, let's look at this Wired article about the attack. Claudio Guarnieri of Amnesty International and security researcher Colin Anderson believe a hacker group called Rocket Kitten is behind the attack, because the infrastructure they're using is similar to past attacks that have been attributed to Rocket Kitten, so it's a bit speculative. There's also speculation that Rocket Kitten is tied to the Iranian government, although FireEye's cyber espionage manager John Hultquist said, quote, "Their focus generally revolves around those with an interest in Iran and defense issues, but their activity is absolutely global." According to Anderson, quote, "The individuals that are targeted are individuals who are human rights activists. They're opposition figures. They're individuals tied with people who are currently in jail or under house arrest or these sort of things. The fact that they're going after these individuals shows that this is part of a larger understanding of the opposition environment inside of the country." Regardless of who's really behind the attack, it's a serious issue. Telegram said in a statement, quote, "If someone has access to your SMS messages, they will get access to your account. If you have two-factor authentication enabled on Telegram and they have access to your recovery email and SMS, they will get access to your account. Since Telegram is based on phone contacts, any party can potentially check whether a phone number is registered in the system. This is also true for any other contact-based messaging app, WhatsApp, Messenger, etc. They've since patched the API to prohibit mass checks. But Anderson says the real problem here is what he calls an information gap. No matter how much detail Telegram or whoever provides about how to secure accounts, a lot of people just aren't going to hear about it, which is why I've made an effort in this podcast to educate people about these things. But the problem is worse in countries where people don't read English very well, and to make matters worse, when you have a country ruled by a repressive regime, it's far less likely that the information about these sorts of attacks will be made available in the local language. Strong encryption is good, but it's only part of the picture. It pays to stay up to speed on all the software you're using, what the best user practices are, and by all means, keep it up to date. Say, if you're tired of the promos in this podcast, well, the patrons got it early and with no ads or promos. Just go to patreon.bogosity.tv and donate at any level.
Hey everybody, this is Dave of the Superplex Bros, and you're listening to the Bogosity podcast. When you're done, why don't you head over to superplexbros.com. We have all kinds of editorials and reviews on video games and pro wrestling. We're also currently hosting a major project called the Superplex Pokemon League, and we're about to go into our third season. We just had our actual draft, and we're going over all of the teams and their draft picks. So why don't you head on over there, check things out, and if you like, you can even check out the Superplex Brothers podcast, where Matt and I basically bullshit about video games, pro wrestling, or whatever the hell we want. Anyway, until next time, take care.
You know, as much as statists claim we need the government for scientific progress, it always seems to do more to impede that progress than promote it. Case in point, the FDA, which we've criticized before, but this time it isn't the FDA themselves, but restrictions Congress has imposed upon them. This involves the Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2016, which is a must-pass bill that, guess what, had a bunch of riders attached to it. Yes, we really need downsized DC's One Subject at a Time Act. One of those riders was a ban on the study of heritable genetic modification of humans. In other words, fixing genetic issues in children. Now, I want to emphasize a couple of things. First of all, this is a ban on investigational use. Studying about it. Trying to learn about it, even if you're not actually doing it. Second, while it sounds like some sort of Frankenstein business, this also includes basic treatments that should be no-brainers. For example, if the mother has a mitochondrial disease, implant mitochondria from the father. Since the mitochondria contain DNA, this counts as a genetic modification, even though there's no conceivable way this could result in any harm or unpredictable effects. In fact, the FDA isn't even allowed to review the science on preventing these orders through mitochondrial implantation. The report accompanying the bill says, quote, "Researchers do not yet fully understand all the possible side effects of editing the genes of a human embryo. Editing of the human germline may involve serious and unquantifiable safety and ethical issues." In the case of mitochondrial implantation, that's just bogus, but even if we take it at face value, and there are such issues with nuclear implantation or modification, again, this also prohibits studying about it. And while there are most certainly safety and ethical issues to be resolved with certain particular methods of genetic modification in humans, how are we going to resolve those without studying about it? Now, you can still edit human DNA for research purposes, you just can't get government funding for it, so it's not an outright ban, but it will still be a chilling effect, and will not only prevent very promising techniques like mitochondrial implantation, this will also affect savior siblings, which is where you have human embryos created for in vitro fertilization that fail a tissue match. Instead of just making a bunch of embryos and hoping that one of them will match, you make sure the one you create matches and the stem cells can be used for the sibling. Really, this is just more restrictions on a 30-year-old policy in which they're pretending that nothing at all has changed. And it's not just genetic engineering, but the whole field of early human development has been curtailed by this policy, while other related fields have been improving by leaps and bounds. Now they've extended this to the FDA, so that no entity that makes applications to the FDA can even do research in this area. Once again, we see Congress is full of non-scientists passing nonsense. Hackers, terrorists, the NSA. But I repeat myself. Your online security is under attack, and the weakest point is your password. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass plugs into your browser and allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords anywhere on the web, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers and all your computers, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, membership info, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications and even mobile devices, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. So last week we covered the seizure of Kickass Torrents, and in particular how it renders the DMCA safe harbor concept invalid. We also mentioned that Ira Rothkin, Kim.com's lawyer in the Mega Upload case, was taking up the defense here. This past week, Rothkin sent the DOJ a letter asking it to drop the case, and while no one thinks it's going to be effective for that, it does seem to lay out the case for the defense, including things that we didn't even think of, which is why we're not defense lawyers. Rothkin says, quote, "Nothing more is alleged in the criminal complaint than that a visitor to defendant's alleged Kickass Torrents, CAT, site can take advantage of automated search processes embodied there to search for and locate .torrent files. Such files contain textual information assembled by automated processes and do not contain copyrighted content. After leaving the defendant's alleged websites, the visitor may stop and do nothing or use the data in such torrent files in conjunction with third-party client software, and that pursuit may, according to the desires of the user and the uncertain nature of the availability of third-party files on the internet, lead to both infringing and non-infringing files being constructed that are located elsewhere on the internet. By the time any possible primary infringement by a former CAT visitor could ever occur, the visit to the site is long over. The indictment does not even come close to alleging direct willful copyright infringement as CAT contains and transmits no content files. Defendants cannot be held criminally responsible for what users do after they leave the CAT search engine behind. The Copyright Act does not criminalize secondary copyright infringement. Paragraph 19 of the affidavit inaccurately states, "Between on or about June 24, 2016 and on or about June 30th, 2016, HSI special agents downloaded from the Northern District of Illinois the following pre-release movies from CAT at subject domain 4. There was no movie or other content on CAT that could ever be downloaded, and therefore no direct infringements could have occurred on CAT. Infringements that occur after users, including HSI special agents, leave the CAT site behind cannot be criminally actionable against CAT." Now, the HSI investigators in question located a torrent on CAT for Captain America Civil War, and the complaint focuses almost exclusively on this. Because unlike other pirated content, pre-release works have criminal infringement attached, but Rothkin points out serious issues with this. Quote, "There is no evidence to support the allegations as Captain America Civil War or as to any specific work. The lack of evidence is not surprising given that the CAT technology did not store or transmit any content. If a user committed copyright infringement, it is only after they left the CAT servers behind. It is settled that liability for direct copyright infringement cannot be based on provision of information services to individuals that such individuals use to commit infringement. More specifically, it is also well-settled law that mere hyperlinks and their more attenuated cousin, torrent files, cannot constitute direct copyright infringement. In brief, because CAT did not copy anything or transmit content, it cannot be charged with direct copyright infringement. And here's the big one. We debunked the claim that CAT wasn't responding to DMCA complaints, but as Rothkin points out, even if that were the case, that's a civil offense, not criminal. Quote, "There is no act of Congress establishing a crime for violations of the DMCA safe harbors. The DMCA is a defense in the civil context of contributory and vicarious liability for copyright infringement committed by third parties, and of liability for intentionally inducing third parties to commit copyright infringement. The government, by throwing against the wall the criminal conspiracy theory without any statutory support from Congress, is trying to argue judge-made civil common law by analogy. Common law civil liability principles cannot be extended to impose criminal liability. Crimes must be specifically defined by Congress. Federal crimes are solely creatures of statute. In other words, for the DOJ to even have a case when it's not even clear that they do, not that that's ever stopped the courts before, they would need to be taking civil action, not criminal. I have no hope of the DOJ seeing sense here, but hopefully we'll luck out and a judge with both rationality and courage will be assigned the case. Want to get $5 really quick? Just fire up your mobile device and go to Get5, that's GET numeral 5.bogosity.tv. By using this link to sign in to the Amazon app for the first time, or if it's been more than 12 months, you'll get $5 off your order of $10 or more. So what are you waiting for? Go to get5.bogosity.tv. Now you can make Amazon purchases with Bitcoin by going to purse.bogosity.tv. Save an average of 20% just by buying from Purse, or get even greater discounts by linking your Amazon wish list. Go to purse.bogosity.tv. Bogosity.tv is a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program. Just clear your cookies and go to amazon.bogosity.tv, or check the right-hand side of the podcast page for Amazon's best deals. So next time you buy online, go to amazon.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to unmoor this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And it's actually been a bit of a slow week. Some weeks it seems like they just won't stop crowding in to get the dishonor. But there were a few dumb things we could have covered, like Bernie Sanders buying a $600,000 Lakeview house, Jonathan McIntosh wanting game designers to force gamers to make the right decisions during gameplay, and a Turkish news outlet claiming they exposed secret message from those attempting the coup, which were actually GTA 4 cheat codes. Any of them would have qualified. But with Hillary Clinton's official nomination, I thought this would be a good time to go back to the well a bit, cover something of a more traditional skeptic story, and we're even going to change it up a bit and defend Hillary, as well as her husband Bill, now that the rumors have resurged that they've been killing off their political enemies. Yes, it's your typical conspiracy theory, and there's also a bit of the King Tut curse there, where they cast a wide net and point at all the deaths and say that it must be something suspicious, when you could easily find the same thing with anyone who has the same reach as they do. Snopes has a good review of all of these, and yes, they're keeping it updated, so let's go through some of it. So according to the list going around, something like 50 colleagues, advisors, and citizens who were about to testify against the Clintons died in suspicious circumstances, and of course that must mean that Bill Clinton or his henchmen were behind each and every one of them. And I love what they point out here, quote, "In a frenzied media climate where the chief executive couldn't boff a White House intern without the whole world finding out every niggling detail of each encounter and demanding his removal from office, are we seriously to believe that the same man had been having double handfuls of detractors and former friends murdered with impunity?" So they go into what I was saying about the reach, and of course being public figures, they're going to have a much wider circle of connections than any of us would. But it's often one-sided, like they talk about a bunch of interns, but most interns will never even have met Clinton, and he wouldn't have known any of them, or even remember having met a lot of them. They also point out how body count lists are nothing new. They've done that with John F. Kennedy, and they all have pretty much the same aspects, such as, quote, "List every dead person with even the most tenuous of connections to your subject. Play word games. Make sure every death is presented as mysterious. All accidental deaths are to be labeled suspicious, even though by definition accidents occur when something unexpected goes wrong. Every self-inflicted death discussed must include the phrase ruled a suicide to imply just the opposite. When an autopsy contradicts a mysterious death theory, dispute it. When none was performed because none was needed, claim that no autopsy was allowed. Make liberal use of words such as allegedly and supposedly to dismiss facts you can't support or contradict with hard evidence. Every inconsistency or unexplained detail you can dredge up is offered as evidence of a conspiracy, no matter how insignificant or pointless it may be. You don't have to establish an alternate theory, just keep harping that it can't be explained. If the data doesn't fit your conclusion, ignore it. You don't have to explain why the people who claim to have the most damaging goods on Clinton, e.g. Jennifer Flowers, Paula Jones, Kathleen Willey, Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky, Kenneth Starr, are still walking around unscathed, while dozens of bit players have been bumped off. It's inconvenient for you, so don't mention it. Most important, don't let facts and details stand in your way. If you can pass off a death by pneumonia as a suicide, do it. If a cause of death contradicts your conspiracy theory, claim it was never determined. So they go into where this started, and apparently it goes back to 1994, when Congressman William Dannemeyer listed 24 people who had some connection to Clinton who had died, quote, under other than natural circumstances, and called for hearings. That list was taken from one compiled by Linda Thompson, a lawyer who quit her general practice in 1993 to form the American Justice Federation. Gotta love that name. That just fills you with so much confidence, doesn't it? And she called her list the Clinton Body Count, Coincidence or the Kiss of Death, and included the names of 34 people she believed had died suspiciously at the hands of the Clintons. She admitted she had no evidence of this. She said the deaths were probably caused by, quote, people trying to control the president, but never said who they were, but said that her allegations, quote, seem groundless only because the mainstream media haven't done enough digging. Yes, that's right, it's their fault that you don't have evidence. Except, of course, that the mainstream media had investigated these, even before she put her list together, but certainly afterwards. And this Snopes article lists them. And there's nothing to substantiate any of these. Now, you can read through all of these yourselves. I just want to hit the highlights on a few of them, such as, quote, Mary Mahone, former White House intern, gunned down in a coffee shop. Nothing was taken. It was suspected that she was about to testify about sexual harassment at the White House. First of all, it's Mary Mahoney, not Mahone. And a guy named Carl Cooper was arrested and charged with the murders in 1999. According to his guilty plea, he went to the Starbucks to rob the place. He came in after closing, waved a gun, and ordered all the employees into the back room. Well, Mahoney tried to make a run for it. Cooper ordered her back to the room, but she went for his gun. Cooper shot her, and then shot the other 2 employees. He left empty-handed, because he was afraid the shots had attracted attention, so... The whole idea about nothing was taken, like that was something suspicious? No, it was just a robbery gone wrong. Also, there's not really a connection between her and Clinton. She did once work at an intern in the White House, but like I said, most of the interns don't even meet Clinton. Those who do usually get a handshake or nowadays maybe a selfie or something like that. It's not someone who would have intimate knowledge of the goings-on of the White House. And the claim that she was about to testify about sexual harassment just isn't true. This comes from a Newsweek article from Mike Isikoff, who broke the story that a former White House staffer with the initial M was going to talk about her affair with Clinton. Of course, we all know now that that was Monica Lewinsky, not Mary Mahoney, but it still gets spread around. Here's probably the most popular one, quote, Vincent Foster, former White House counsel, found dead of a gunshot wound to the head and ruled a suicide. He had significant knowledge of the Clintons' financial affairs and was a business partner with Hillary. If the Clintons are guilty of the crimes they are accused of by Larry, Vincent Foster would have detailed knowledge of those crimes. And I love what Snopes points out here, quote, from here on, read, ruled a suicide as an investigation was carried out and arrived at this ruling as the only reasonable conclusion. Now, there's often a claim that there was a suicide note. That's not true. What it actually was an outline for a letter of resignation. Kenneth Starr had investigated this thoroughly and released his report, and that was the 3rd such investigation on the matter. And all of them concluded that Foster shot himself with a pistol that was discovered in his right hand. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence that he'd been drugged or intoxicated or his body had been moved. And as Snopes said, quote, Starr would have been the last person to want to conclude the investigation prematurely, or are we to believe Kenneth Starr is part of the cover-up too? Then they mentioned C. Victor Reiser II, former National Finance Co-Chairman of Clinton for President, and Montgomery Reiser, his son. Both died in a suspicious private plane crash in Alaska. This is another continuing theme you'll see through these suspicious plane crashes. Reiser, his son, and 3 others did die in the plane crash, but the pilot and another passenger survived and were hospitalized with severe burns. The body count list claims that no cause was determined, but the NTSB reported that pilot error in a small plane flying in mountainous terrain during low visibility conditions was what led to the crash. And I mean, there are lots of private jet pilots out there, and of course, rich and powerful people like the Clintons are going to be connected with a lot of people who have their own jets and who fly private jets, so I mean, you just expect those kind of things. Then there's DNC political director Paul Tully, found dead in a hotel room. No cause was ever determined, no autopsy was allowed. Tully was a key member of the damage control squad and came up with some of the Clinton strategies. But that's not true. An autopsy was performed, and Tully's cause of death was determined as a massive heart attack, which isn't a surprise given that he was extremely overweight, a heavy drinker, and a chain smoker. We have Herschel Friday, another plane accident. They say his plane exploded. That's not true. It's another case of pilot error. He was 73 years old at the plane's controls and crashed it during an attempted landing on a poorly lighted private airfield at dusk on a dark and drizzly day. John Wilson, former D.C. council member with ties to Whitewater, died of a very suspicious hanging suicide. It's not that suspicious when you consider he had a long history of depression, was wrestling with marital problems, and tried to kill himself on at least 4 other occasions. When he died, his wife said, quote, "His depression was an inherited problem. That he was able to contribute so much over the years in the face of his disability was a miracle." And the police found that he did not leave a note, and there were no signs of foul play. And then you've got an interesting couple. There's Bill Shelton, Arkansas State Trooper, and his fiancée, Kathy Ferguson. Kathy Ferguson supposedly found dead in her living room of a gunshot wound to the head, ruled a suicide, and she actually left a suicide note that said, quote, "I can't stay here any longer. Things will never be the same for us. I can't take that." Shelton committed suicide by shooting himself at her grave. He left a suicide note saying that just a month earlier they had quarreled. He accused her of cheating on him, and he blamed himself for driving her to suicide. There's nothing mysterious about either of these deaths, and here's the interesting part about these. The only connection they have to the Clintons was that they're in Arkansas. You've got an Arkansas State Trooper and his fiancée. That's it. Stanley Huggins, suicide. His extensive report has never been released. It wasn't suicide, it was pneumonia. Florence Martin, accountant for the CIA, 3 gunshot wounds to the head. She was actually murdered in her home by 3 gunshot wounds to the head through a pillow. She was not an accountant for the CIA, as they claim. She worked the graveyard shift at a convenience store. Jack Wesley was charged with her murder. DNA found at the scene was matched to him. He has no connection to the Clintons. Paula Grober, Clinton's interpreter for the deaf, died in a 1-car accident. There were no witnesses. Why Clinton would need to knock off his interpreter for the deaf, I have no idea. But what happened was her car overturned at a curve in the highway, throwing her 33 feet from the vehicle. There were no witnesses to the accident, no evidence that it was anything but an accident, and no reason why Clinton would want to kill her. Here's another popular one that goes around. Ron Brown, former DNS chairman and Commerce Secretary, reported to have died in a plane crash, but new evidence reveals he may have been shot in the head. Now this is funny. He and 34 others were killed in a plane crash in Croatia. That's not the funny part. The plane crashed into a mountain while on a landing approach. There were no survivors. Now, this gunshot thing comes from an X-ray of Brown's skull, showing what supposedly looks like a round entry wound. But there was no bullet, no bone fragments, no metal fragments, and no exit wound. And how and when would he have been shot? As Snopes asks, quote, "Was he shot in the head during the flight, in full view of 34 other witnesses? If so, how did the shooters get off the plane? Did the killers shoot him before the flight, then bundle his body into a seat just like Weekend at Bernie's and hoped nobody noticed the gaping hole in his head? Or did Croatian commandos fortuitously appear on the scene to scale a mountain and pump a bullet into the head of an already dead plane crash victim?" Well, in reality, of course, it was pilot error. Then you have Ron Brown's co-worker, Barbara Wise, found dead in her locked office the day after Thanksgiving, ruled a suicide. Interestingly, she was found partially clothed, bruised, and in a pool of blood. There was no pool of blood. Her death was never ruled a suicide. An investigation found no evidence of foul play or suicide. She had a history of frequent and severe health problems, including liver ailments, and her death was attributed to natural causes. And they also give a huge segment where you have 2 guys, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, who were supposedly linked to Bill Clinton, and then all of these deaths are tied to them. But Henry and Ives never had anything to do with Clinton. They just ripped off drugs from a dealer and were beaten to death in a revenge killing. Let's see, we have reporter L.J. Davis investigating the Clinton scandals. He was attacked in his hotel room and his notes were taken. He survived. According to Davis, he awakened in his hotel room with a bump on his head. He admitted having drunk at least 4 martinis the previous night. No pages were missing from his notebook. He had no idea how he ended up on the floor. Quote, I certainly wasn't about to conclude that somebody cracked me on the head. Okay, drunk guy falls out of bed. I mean, that's what we have. And the list goes on and on and on, and there's nothing to actually tie Clinton to any of these deaths. None of these deaths are linked to crimes, or the ones that are, the crimes have been solved, and we know the perpetrator had nothing to do with the Clintons. What we have is a list of people who died, some of whom Clinton was acquainted with. That's it. And again, if Clinton was bumping off political enemies, why didn't he bump off Monica Lewinsky or Linda Tripp or Kenneth Starr? So as of the recording of this podcast, the page had been updated as of July 7th, 2016, and presumably they'll keep it updated, as the conspiracy morons add more and more people to the list, as I'm sure there will be. And as many businesses and everything that Trump has done to build up an immense circle of acquaintances, how many such suspicious deaths are there among them? Is there a Trump body count list? If not, I suspect there soon will be. As it stands, the Clinton body count conspiracy theorists take this week's biggest Bogon emitter. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to dive and delve around this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And it's more Bogosity through the mainstream media around Uber, the ride-sharing service we've been covering quite a bit. One of the claims about Uber is that it will reduce the level of drunk driving, since a drunk, or someone on the drunk's behalf, can just summon an Uber car, and so he doesn't have to get behind the wheel to go home. This week, that intersects with something else we've covered quite a bit. The Newsrepedia reporting on a scientific study without actually reading it. Because if they had, as this TechDirt article shows, they include CNN, The Washington Post, Fortune, Fox, NBC, and many others, even online sources such as Digital Trends, would have avoided making the horrible error of reporting en masse that a new study purported to show that Uber has no effect on drunk driving, in reality says no such thing. So this study, published in the American Journal of Epidemiology entitled Uber and Metropolitan Traffic Fatalities in the United States, and TechDirt actually links to the full study itself, and I really wish the mainstream media would do the same, does say that Uber doesn't have much effect on alcohol-related fatalities, but alcohol-related fatalities and drunk driving rates are two entirely different things. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, nearly 10,000 Americans die each year in crashes involving drunk drivers. About 2/3 of that are the drunks themselves. But according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, there are about 1.1 million DUI arrests every year, and that's just a fraction of the CDC's estimate of 121 million instances of drunk driving each year in which the driver isn't caught. And the TechDirt article also cites a study from Stephen Levitt of Freakonomics fame showing that drunk drivers average just one arrest per 27,000 miles driven while intoxicated. When you consider that the average American drives just over 13,000 miles a year, then someone could drive drunk continuously for 2 years without being pulled over. The study's authors say, quote, "We did not examine Uber's association with other traffic outcomes, including drunk driving incidences and non-fatal crashes. Future research should investigate these relationships to further expand our understanding of rideshare services. And even though the CDC cites taxis as an important measure in preventing drunk driving, ride-sharing services like Uber are usually cheaper, easier, and more convenient than taxis. Also, these services are more popular among millennials, who also have a greater tendency to drive drunk, so it would make sense that Uber, Lyft, and other ride-sharing services would cause a decline in DUI and alcohol-related fatalities. One problem with the study is that it looked at data from 2005 to 2014 for the top 100 metropolitan areas where Uber has entered the market. But Uber doesn't often become available over the entire metro area, and in most cases, Uber was introduced in 2014, the last year of the study. You also have cases where many of these cities created a hostile regulatory environment for Uber, including issuing cease and desist orders and even holding sting operations. You also didn't have wide availability of Uber Pool, a cheaper service. Uber has much greater coverage throughout the country now than it did at the end of this study. Also, the study failed to account for the number of people taking advantage of Uber. According to Pew Research, by December of 2015, only 15% of U.S. adults had used a ride-sharing service. Of those, only 17%, that's 17% of the 15%, reported using it more than once or twice a month. It still hasn't caught on enough for rare statistics like drunk driving fatalities to show up to any degree of significance without focusing on specific areas where ride-sharing services are being used more often. TechDirt cites other studies with better methodology, like a 2015 Temple University study which looked at UberX in California and found a reduction in motor vehicle homicides between 3.5 and 5.6%, and a study from Mothers Against Drunk Driving that also looked at UberX in California and found alcohol-related crashes by drivers under 30 fell 6.5%. Or a study from Providence College published in June of this year, which found that DUIs have dropped 15 to 62% after Uber's entry into the market, which also resulted in a 6% decline in the fatal accident rate. Also, remember when we covered Austin pushing Uber and Lyft out of the city? Well, after that happened, DUI arrests almost immediately went up by 7.5%. Way to go, Austin! But none of that has stopped the news media from using this study to try and debunk all of the good information showing how ride-sharing services have decreased drunk driving. It seems like science journalists once again are putting their politics before the science, or maybe just not looking very hard at the science at all. So all of that once again makes the news media this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this I like their spatulas so much, I bought the company edition of the Bogosity podcast. Come join the discussion at forum.bogosity.tv, and feel free to join in by sending a question, statement, news article, or rant in text or audio to podcast@bogosity.tv. This podcast depends on you to keep going, so please donate using the links on the website or the QR codes in the thumbnail, or become a patron at patreon.bogosity.tv and get the podcast and YouTube videos early and without ads or promos. Thank you for listening. Remember, no podcast next week, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Until then, here's a quote from Lawrence Lessig. Overregulation stifles creativity. It smothers innovation. It gives dinosaurs a veto over the future. It wastes the extraordinary opportunity for a democratic creativity that digital technology enables. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.